Uh-oh, Jeff has his coffee mug. That usually doesn't mean good stuff. So hey guys, I'm sure you've all seen that the CPSC recently put out a scathing warning about ONEWHEELs, an official document from the federal government saying that ONEWHEELs are not worth your life. Do not ride them, whatever you do. So obviously this has caused some pretty big shockwaves through the community. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really know what the CPSC was. Or sort of what the extent of their power was. So there's a lot of confusion going around right now. So what I did is I reached out to someone I know on Instagram. I actually didn't even know him, but I've been following him for a while. His name's Robert. He's a rad dude. He's an attorney down in LA, and he's sort of an expert with this kind of stuff when it comes to brands and what's legal, what's not legal, who can get in trouble, who can't, sort of what the future is going to be for all this. So I thought it'd be great. We could have him on the channel. We could interview him, and he could explain a couple of things to us, because I don't know about you guys, but I was pretty confused by this whole thing. So let's jump on into it. All right, guys. So I am here with Robert. Robert, how do I pronounce your last name?
It's Freund.
Freund. All right. So Robert, you want to introduce yourself and sort of let everyone know what you do, what you're all about?
Yeah, I'm an advertising and e-commerce attorney. I'm based in Los Angeles. I've been practicing this is my 11th year. I started my career at a big law firm doing commercial litigation. Most of what I did was defend big companies against consumer class actions, most of which had to do with false advertising in some way. After about 7 years, I left that firm to start my own practice. And what I do now is I help people and businesses who sell things online avoid those risks and hopefully not end up in a lawsuit in the first place. And I'm stoked to be here, and I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, for sure. Super stoked to have you, Robert. To give you guys a little background, I've been following Robert on Instagram for a while. He has these really cool posts describing, like, a recent one was, "Can Adidas drop Yay?" That was a super informative one. But I reached out to him, said, "Hey, I don't know if you've seen this thing with the CPSC and ONEWHEEL." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I saw it." I asked him if he'd want to weigh in, and he said he's down. So Robert, thank you very much for being here, man. Super appreciate it. Have you ever ridden a ONEWHEEL before?
I haven't. I've always been intrigued by them. A lot of people in my neighborhood have them, and I see them zipping around. And I grew up skating, and that was pretty much the only board sport I was involved in. I snowboarded a bit. I was really into skating through college. Sort of dropped off a little bit as I've prioritized not getting injured, which I'm not afraid to admit. But no, I haven't been on a ONEWHEEL, but I think they're cool for what that's worth.
Oh, good deal. I think you got to try one out. They're super fun. They definitely scratch that like shred skate itch from back in the day. But I don't know, man. According to the federal government, they're extremely dangerous, and it's not worth your life.
Yeah, the statement that one of the either commissioners or directors, I can't remember his title, from the CPSC issued.
It's actually the commissioner. Richard Trumka. Richard Trumka Jr., I believe.
Yeah, he said it's not worth dying for, which is a pretty aggressive way to respond to the CPSC's action and then ONEWHEEL's response. I can understand and appreciate how bad that looks from a PR perspective for a ONEWHEEL, and I can totally understand why fans of the product are wondering what's going on. Why would a federal government agent say something like that in connection with this product that so many people use and love?
Sure. Yeah. The opening line of his statement was, "Immediately stop using all ONEWHEEL electric skateboards. They are not worth dying for." They say Future Motion's ONEWHEEL self-balancing electric skateboards have a fatal defect that can eject their riders, causing serious injury and death. At least 4 people have tragically died from traumatic head injuries. And it looks like it lists traumatic head injuries specifically, and then it also lists out a fatal defect. So I guess, but they didn't spell anywhere really where that fatal defect was, and it seems like they're calling for a full recall of every single product they've ever made, not just their newer models, from V1 Plus, XR, Pint, Pint X, and GT, all of them. So apparently all of them have this fatal defect. So do we have any idea exactly what that fatal defect is and what they could do to fix that fatal defect?
At this point, No, they haven't publicly announced specifically what that defect is. And I think that is the source of some of the confusion from the public who are responding, interpreting that to mean, well, this is just the federal government trying to impose a nanny state and saying that people just shouldn't ride things that expose them to risk. And some of the comments I've seen are like, well, what's next? Why don't you ban cars? Because those are dangerous. Why don't you ban bicycles? And they're not saying, it's not the CPSC's duty to sort of take anything that has risk off the market. What they are saying is that there's something wrong with the way that this product has been either designed or manufactured or labeled that has an unreasonable risk to the public. The problem is we don't know specifically what that defect is that they're addressing. And we won't know that unless and until they initiate an administrative action and that evidence is made public. So right now, we don't really know what it is. Like, is it the wiring of some component or is it something about how it's manufactured that is presenting that risk? We don't know what that is.
Sure. So we don't know if it's like on a product defect level or if it's on just a straight up the way the product was designed and now you have to re-engineer something in order to make it not eject riders off the front, which I don't know about you, but I don't know any way to re-engineer physics because that's really the only way you'd be able to keep it from ejecting riders off the front, I would think.
Right. Unless there's something about the way this product is made that they could correct so that there's not that risk of the product reacting or having some kind of action that ejects people from it in a way that the company could control, which is probably what I'm assuming that's what they've identified. And there have no doubt been discussions between the CPSC and ONEWHEEL about what they're actually talking about. But ONEWHEEL has taken the stance that we're not going to engage in this voluntary recall process with you. They already went through that process to some extent with the ONEWHEEL GT and the pad issue, from what I understand. But this time around, they're saying, no, we're not going to recall this, which is kind of an aggressive response from ONEWHEEL. And I think it goes without saying that there's some beef between the CPSC and leadership at ONEWHEEL.
I think you're definitely correct about that. It seems like from reading the commissioner's statement that he's got a bit of an axe to grind with them right now. That doesn't read like a normal statement would. The opening line of "it's not worth dying for" seems personal almost.
I agree. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So I guess let's sort of walk through the different options that Future Motion could do and sort of what a recall would look like, right? Because they suggested, the CPSC has suggested a voluntary recall. Future Motion had said, kick rocks, it's not going to happen. But Future Motion had just done the voluntary recall with the foot pad issue. So it sounds like they were sort of acting in good faith, thinking, okay, here's our pound of flesh, we'll go ahead and do this. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, we want more, right? So what are Future Motion's options? They can either continue down this path of saying, we're not going to do it, or if they agree to a full voluntary recall, what does that look like? Does that mean every single ONEWHEEL has to be shipped back to Future Motion? Does that mean every single one has to be disabled? Or does that mean you just have the option to send it in or get your money back, or how does that work?
Yeah, so typically, well, I don't want to say typically because like I sort of mentioned before this discussion, I don't handle CPSC issues. It's not really my main focus. But from what I've seen, one option is a sort of voluntary recall where you make this announcement, you alert the public that we are recalling this, you can send the product back to us, something of that nature. ONEWHEEL or the company is apparently taking the position that we're not going to engage in that at all. So what happens next is if that's their position and they're not going to play ball, which it seems like that is the case, then the potential next step, at least from the CPSC, is to initiate an administrative action to force them to initiate a recall, and if they don't, and potentially impose civil penalties. Now, when those actions are initiated, more often than not, they're resolved through a settlement, and they enter into a consent agreement that includes sometimes an agreement to pay a civil penalty and an agreement to actually institute that recall that the CPSC was looking for in the first place. if they don't reach a consent agreement and OneWheel continues to sort of defy the CPSC and won't pay the fines or what have you, then the CPSC can go to a federal court and ask for an injunction for the sale and force to the maximum extent that you can enforce something through the courts, the discontinuation of the sale of the products, and in some cases even seizure of the products from the company. So there's sort of stages of escalation, and the trend from the CPSC is to be more aggressive and to say, okay, if you're not going to agree to our voluntary procedure, then we will file this administrative action and get that process started. That would be my bet if there's not if there's not news that they've come to an agreement in the next, I don't know, week or several weeks. I would put money on the fact that we'll see the CPSC initiate that administrative action.
Okay, so you said that that's sort of the trend that they tend to do. Are there any instances where this sort of letter comes out, this statement saying, hey, this thing's dangerous, and then they just never come to an agreement and sort of drop it?
I can't say that that's never happened. I did see a statement, I think it was like a policy statement that was issued from the CPSC. I apologize, I can't remember when, but when I was researching this, there was a statement to the effect that we're going to be pursuing more of these, and we've seen that played out. And you can go to the CPSC's website and look at all of the administrative actions that they have filed and the results of them. It's all that sort of procedure is all public. Not all of the information and the evidence is public. A lot of it's redacted, but their position is that we're going to do that in more cases going forward. We've seen it with Peloton. We've seen it with a number of other companies in the last few years, and there's more of that than there was in the past.
Gotcha. So you did mention Peloton. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with Peloton? Because that's kind of an interesting situation, and it seems to parallel this situation pretty closely.
Right. I can't remember exactly what the issue was, and so I apologize for not.
It's their treadmill. Yeah, it's all right. Good. So I'll catch everyone up. So Peloton, famous for their exercise bikes that cost way too much money. They came out with a treadmill, and the treadmill ended up causing the death of one child and injured numerous others, a few dozen, I think. But the problem is the kids get sucked underneath the belt, something like that. But the CPSC came out with a very, very similar statement to the one that they just recently came out with Future Motion. But it seems like Peloton has also decided not to play ball. If you look online, you can still see the treadmills for sale. And it's been, I can't remember the date, but it's been, what, a year or so that it's been in limbo here?
Right. So the most recent thing on the CPSC's website from this is that they agreed to a recall after administrative action and after a civil penalty was imposed, and they've extended a full refund for consumers with this recalled treadmill through November 6, 2023. So I believe they initially agreed to some recall period where they'll refund every customer that wants to send their treadmill back, and now they've agreed to extend that further for an additional year.
Okay, interesting. So has the CPSC made them change anything with their design, do you think? Or is this basically a, hey, this danger exists. If you weren't aware of it, you can feel free to send it back. We'll give you a full refund. But if you choose to accept this danger, then you could buy it and you can continue to have it. Is that sort of the scenario?
No, they won't be continuing to sell whatever those models are. I'm not sure whether they've changed whatever their formula is for, or their design of that product, or if they're releasing something new in its place. But if you agree to a recall with the CPSC, you can't continue to sell that product because it has that defect that has been identified as presenting an unreasonable risk of injury. So that product, if it's still being offered for sale, could subject Peloton or any other company that agrees to one of these recalls to additional civil penalties. So from a policy perspective, it's not a good idea, and the CPSC wouldn't accept that, well, there's this unreasonable hazard out there and there's a voluntary recall if you want to send it back, but we can continue to have it on the market. So those won't be sold anymore.
Gotcha. So it must be a new Peloton treadmill model that they're selling right now then.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. So let's say worst case scenario, CPSC comes through, tells Future Motion, hey, gets the court order, you got to stop sales of these things, no more. How does that affect us current one wheel riders and our boards? Are we still able to ride them? Are we still able to sell them on the used market? Are we still able to offer parts? Sort of what does that look like?
Yeah, you can certainly still ride them. It's up to you whether you want to accept the risk as you see it to continue to use a product that you already have. It's not like it's now illegal to do something that the government or the company has said is dangerous. I would be careful about reselling those. An attorney that focuses on product liability specifically would be able to weigh in better about what the potential downstream risk is if you're a reseller of these products. But if a third party retailer like Amazon continued to sell it, they would potentially be on the hook for putting into the stream of commerce a product that they knew or should have known has a substantial risk or an unreasonable risk of injury. And Amazon has been subject to CPSC actions for that very thing, where a product was subject to a recall and Amazon continued to sell it after the fact. Obviously, individuals, putting something up on eBay or selling it on Craigslist or something are not the same as Amazon. So the honest answer is I don't know necessarily if you would face some kind of liability risk if you're selling a used product that was subject to a recall to someone else. But that's certainly something that I would look into before I do that, in the event that you sell this and someone's ejected and then they want to hold you responsible for selling it to them. Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but certainly the responsibility is more on the manufacturer of a product that continues to sell something or a retailer that continues to sell something versus an individual. So if you want to keep riding it, it's not like you're going to face any kind of consequence for doing that, at least legally.
Okay, cool. Thanks for answering that. Appreciate it. Okay, so I don't know if this is a question that you'd be able to answer, but let's say you are CEO and 100% owner of Future Motion. What is your next step at this point? What do you do?
Contact a law firm that handles this. I'm sure they have already done that. I have no doubt that they're working closely with counsel to help navigate through this. And they've probably been advised of the risks and the potential consequences of what they've done so far. And our job as attorneys is to present that risk, explain what the possible outcomes are, and then it's the client's business decision as to how much risk they're comfortable with and what they want to do. If I were them, I'm relatively risk averse. I probably would have attempted to agree to a voluntary recall procedure. And a lot of, reading up on thought leadership and articles written by colleagues that do focus on this, there's sort of a consensus that complying with the voluntary recall process is like the floor for how you should respond. Like that is something that a lot of attorneys would say is non-negotiable just from a risk perspective, because what they've done now is you're subjecting yourself to the expense of fighting the CPSC in administrative action or potentially in federal court, but you're also exposing yourself to the risk of class actions in the private sector. So if there's there are firms that are dedicated to just doing consumer class actions for product defect cases, and they track what the CPSC does and will piggyback on these cases. So if they see a manufacturer that's not willing to comply and continues to sell something, then you can initiate a class action that can be even more financially devastating potentially, even if the people who are the lawsuits being brought on behalf of have not been injured. The theory is, well, I've been injured economically. I shouldn't have paid money, or I wouldn't have paid money for a product that's dangerous. Had I known that it was dangerous, this product shouldn't be on the market, that kind of theory. And so by sort of rebuking the CPSC at this stage, you're giving those plaintiffs' lawyers more to work with and more to chew on if they want to do that. And so I would be, if I'm in leadership at One Wheel, I'd be wary of that and sort of expect that they'd be getting demand letters and that at least there's sort of blood in the water from the plaintiff's bar.
So
So that's a long way of saying I would be reluctant to fight this in the way that they are unless I was really confident and willing to incur the expense of proving that there is not this defect that they're alleging, or at least not to the extent that they're alleging it exists. And, I'm sympathetic to the idea of wanting to vindicate yourself to the public and to the federal government or whatever the venue is. But understanding just how expensive litigating, whether it's administratively or in court or in a class action context, and how stressful and what an expense that is, I would be much more likely than it appears they are to want to cooperate and reach some conclusion without this PR nightmare going on.
sure. So are you saying that sort of fighting the CSPC or the CPSC on this one and saying, oh no, it's not as dangerous as you're saying it is? Are you saying that is actually worse for these class action lawsuits against them? Because if you didn't know, they already have, I believe, one or two class action, maybe more, class action lawsuits against them from injuries from people. We get ads on Facebook from attorneys that are looking for people to sign up. And just this morning, the ads have now changed to include that the CPSC has said that this thing's dangerous, right? So do you think that them sort of digging their heels in and saying it's not as dangerous as they're saying is better for them? Or do you think admitting to, oh, okay, sure, maybe these things are dangerous and let's do a recall, like which one's worse from a legal perspective?
Well, it depends. It depends first of all on like what the facts are, and we don't know that right now. Like we don't know exactly what they're saying is wrong with it, and whether that allegation is actually true or not. In terms of I like to look at things from cost benefit. Like what's the benefit of fighting this all the way through and proving that it is safe, but incurring potentially multiple millions of dollars of legal fees and gambling that, you can be right about something and still have a decision come out against you. Like that happens all the time. And it's kind of a frustrating part of the legal system. And it's a different conversation for a different day. But part of voluntary recall processes and coming to an agreement with the CPSC is that you don't have to admit that anything is wrong. You can say, look, we're not admitting any liability here. In fact, we deny that this problem exists. But to avoid the distraction and the expense of litigating and so forth, we're going to agree to do this recall anyway. And then you can sort of end or at least shorten the news cycle about it. You can significantly reduce the expenses and so forth. But whether it's a good strategy from a legal standpoint, the starting point of all of that is like, well, what's going on? What's true? What specifically are the allegations? What can they prove? What can we prove? And do we want to spend the money to vindicate ourselves if that's possible?
So I don't know if you would know this, but do you know if there's any legal precedent to someone sort of beating the CPSC on something like this? They drag you into federal court and they say, oh, you know what? We've overstepped our bounds. Sorry, we'll back off on this. Sorry for your trouble.
Yeah, that absolutely has happened. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but they don't have, they're not batting 1,000 on all of the cases that they brought. That said, it's not like you get all your money back that you spent proving yourself right. So a lot of times litigation will go in that direction where both sides, especially in the case of private litigation, will spend multiples of what's actually at issue. Like maybe the damages somebody's seeking are $100,000 in like a contract case, for example. Each side can spend over $1 million litigating a $100,000 issue. And that happens all the time because, and I can understand wanting to say, look, this is not true about our product, and it's worth it to invest to show everyone that what they're saying is not true. But again, that calculus really hinges on understanding what the allegation is and what the evidence can bear out.
Sure. Yeah. You don't want to be spending $1 to save a dime. It doesn't make a lot of sense there. So
Yeah, unless it really is worth it to you. And I have had clients that are happy to spend those multiples to show or to have a ruling in hand that's public that says, look, this what we were accused of doing wasn't true. And it also, at least in the context of things like class actions or private litigation, if you settle all the time, you can sort of set a standard or indicate to people that you're sort of just handing out money to anybody who wants to bring a claim against you. So usually, especially larger companies, sometimes will take the position that, look, we're not settling anything. If we lose, it's on us. We have the budget to do that. But at least we're showing people that if you're going to bring the fight to us, you're going to have to fight it. We're not just going to give money out. So it depends on risk tolerance from the client's perspective, and also um, where your priorities are in terms of how you spend your money. Like, is it going to be more expensive to settle cheaply here if you have to settle cheaply a bunch of times?
Yeah, good point. There's a lot of variables that go into that. You can't back down from every fight, or else everyone's going to want to fight you, right?
Right.
Okay. Do you think that what Future Motion has done in the past by marketing the One Wheel the way that they have done has sort of affected why they're getting so much heat from 4 people dying? And I don't want to diminish the deaths of 4 people because obviously that's terrible, but it seems like with any board sport or motorized device that you have, there's going to be a not zero number of deaths with it. I mean, even
Sure.
if skateboarding has something like 40 deaths a year, motorcycles are off the charts insane with the number of deaths, ATVs, snowboarding, any board sport really. So do you feel
Right.
like if they would have come out of the gate and marketed this more as like sort of an extreme board sport as opposed to like last mile PEV commuter device, very easy to ride type thing, that they may be getting less heat now?
I don't think so. It's hard to say. I mean, I can't really peek inside the mind of what the CPSC is looking at, and there's certainly more to the dynamic of these two parties' relationship than we're privy to. But it's I don't think that marketing it as something potentially more risky than they did affects it from a purely legal perspective. I mean, it's like you said, any kind of activity, even walking, can be dangerous. And I think what's regrettable about this whole situation is that it looks like the CPSC is just saying this is a dangerous thing to do and we can't have people engage in this danger. When what they're really trying to say, or should be more clear about saying, is people are free to do risky things if they understand what those risks are. You step on a thing that has one wheel that zips you around, there's a chance you're going to fall, and there's a chance that when you fall, you get hurt. What I wish they would be more clear about, we're not saying that you can't do risky things. We're saying that something about this product makes it risky in a way that could have been prevented or should have been prevented or should be changed. And I don't think it would be a good policy to sort of have brands be afraid to market things as something that's not wildly dangerous just to avoid a situation like this for the government coming after you. Like, not everything could be marketed as this scary extreme thing if it's not really. And in my opinion, the one wheel is not like, it's not like riding a dirt bike or jumping an ATV or something to me. So I don't think that it would have affected much. I'm speculating, but I also wouldn't want to see brands feel like they have to market products as being, extremely risky so that they have some sort of back pocket argument that everyone knew this was this incredibly dangerous thing.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, Robert, super appreciate your time on all this, man. I've learned a ton. I hope everyone watching has learned a ton. Is there anything that you wanted to cover that we might have missed?
No, I think, this has been helpful for me because I haven't really peeked into the CPSC's processes and their history. It's an agency I've been familiar with, but doesn't come up that often in my practice. But it's anytime I learn something like this, it helps me advise my clients about additional risks in addition to their marketing and advertising and things that I usually focus on. So it's been a enlightening couple of days looking into this, and really fascinating from a PR perspective. And I appreciate the opportunity to to come on and discuss it with you.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on for sure. This has been sort of a crash course for all of us into the CPSC. I don't think most of us had even heard of this organization before this week, so it's been a fun one. Robert, can you let everyone know where to find you?
Yeah, I'm primarily on Instagram. That's where I post most of my educational and informative content. It's at Robert Freund Law. Um, my website's also robertfreundlaw.com, and you can reach me by email through there. But mostly I'm on Instagram. As you know, I'm pretty responsive to DMs if anybody wants to reach out, and that's where I spend most of my time.
Yeah, I didn't expect you to hit me back like that, so I was pumped, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Robert. Appreciate you. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one. Float on, my friends.